Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's podcast. We're here in the high strangeness in the liminal abyss. I am your host, Chatan Noir, and on the eve of my Paracon up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, it actually starts tomorrow, but I'll be driving up there early this morning, actually early tomorrow morning. Anyways, I'm leaving my house at 5 a.m. to go pick up my friend, and then we're driving all the way up there. So, it's at Sault Ste. Marie is as far north in the UP of Michigan that you can go before you cross the waters into Canada. So we're pretty high up there, but it is a huge convention. And if you've never been to my Paracon, make plans to go next year because it is one of the biggest paranormal conferences that there is. And you will see all of your favorite ghost investigators, researchers, cryptozoologists, um, psychic mediums. They're all there. So if you like that kind of stuff, plan to come next year because it is a huge event. I will say, make sure you get your hotel room first, ticket second, because they have a ton of tickets, but hotel rooms, those run out fast. So might want to make sure you have that before you have anything else. But carrying on with my theme from last week, where I talked about the ghost ship, the Bannockburn, I'm going to talk about a ship this week that, in my opinion, if ever there was a ghost ship, a haunted ship, a shipwreck that should be haunted, this one should be it. Now, a little more information. This shipwreck is in Lake Superior. Now, there's a very famous song that talks about the Edmund Fitzgerald. But one of the lines in that song is Lake Superior never gives up her dead. And that is because the waters of Lake Superior are so frigid and so cold that when bodies go down with the ship, it's so cold that they never develop any bloat. There's no bacteria to cause the bloat. And if you don't have bloat, you don't have float. So when they say Lake Superior never gets up her dead, she doesn't. And it's only when sailors are washed overboard and have a chance to swim to shore that they actually have a chance of survival. Or they've made it onto a lifeboat or a life raft and been able to get to shore that way. If you go down with the ship, you're never coming back up. And unfortunately, most of the time, even if you were in a lifeboat, your chances of surviving Lake Superior were very seldom to none because a lot of lifeboats in the area of the 17, 18, early 1900s, those lifeboats, those life rafts were not built for the type of wave activity and storms that we see here on the Great Lakes. So what would happen a lot of times is people would make for the lifeboats and would think that they were rescuing themselves and they would get in, they would start paddling, and along would come a big wave and capsize the lifeboat. And people who didn't drown immediately and were able to right the lifeboat and get back in it usually were tossed a second, third, fourth time before they were just too waterlogged and tired to flip the boat back over and stay in it. And a lot of times people were wearing thick, heavy wool clothing. And the thing about wool is it's heavy on its own. Once it gets soaked with water or water and ice, you're really battling against yourself to get to shore as you're trying to swim in white capping water, and you have an idea of where shore is, but you could be a mile out into the lake And that's a long way to swim in waterlogged wool clothing, especially when it's ice cold. So, this is a reason why, when we look at a lot of maritime reports of people who were in the shipwrecks and didn't survive, this is the reason why a lot of them didn't survive, is because the lightboats were just not built to handle the type of wave activity, storm activity that we see on the Great Lakes. Now, they did eventually come up with a better concept, and that was the life raft, which was a square type configuration with boards on. You'd have like four barrels in each, like one barrel in each corner, and then you'd have these uh, 2x4s, or 4x4s, hammered into them. So essentially, it was kind of like a frame, a floating frame, which was easier for people to hold onto. And no matter which way it got flipped in the storm or the waves, people were able to hang on to it. And as long as they were able to stay buoyant and above the water, they were able to somewhat rescue themselves. Now, this didn't work all the time, but it did work enough times that they found that that was a better method. Now, back to the shipwreck that is our guest of honor tonight. So, this shipwreck is known as the SS Kamloops. Now, the Kamloops went down near Isle Royale in Lake Superior. She rests in just about 400 feet of water. So, out, it's out of the limits of a recreational dive. You have to be much more of a technical diver. And the only ones who really dive on her are marine archaeologists and people for the state of Michigan who go down to check on the wrecks and see if they're leaking anything, if they're taking anchor strikes, how they're preserving on the bottom of the lake. So it's very much a technical dive, and at that depth, there's no quick surfacing, because even in freshwater, you have to abide by rules of conduct, which is, if you ascend to the surface too fast, you will get the bends. You'll get air bubbles in your blood. So no matter what happens on the bottom, you have to slowly make your way to the top, releasing bubbles. And the old scuba diver's tale is, you don't surface faster than your slowest bubble. Keep that in mind. So, the SS Kamloops, she's resting on the bottom of Lake Superior. Now, when divers go swimming through her, one of two things happens. The wake of them swimming through activates a corpse that is resting on the ship. And either the corpse comes swimming after them, or they have a face-to-face experience with the corpse. Now, this corpse has been nicknamed by a couple of different people, either Captain Whitey or Old Whitey. And it's a white, waterlogged skeleton who's been down there for over 75 years. Now, imagine you're in scuba gear. You're swimming through the hull of the ship, the side, the small passages, the narrow little walkways, and you know that he's down there because people who have dove on the wreck before tell you you're going to encounter Grandpa or Old Whitey, Captain Whitey, Captain Grandpa, but you don't know when. You don't know where. And then abruptly, as you come around a corner or you're swimming through an open space, suddenly there is this skeletal form floating in front of you, and your lights are shining on it. And this is why they usually dive in teams down there, so that if any one person gets freaked out, you have other people who can stop you from panicking and trying to make a burst for the surface. And Grandpa, as we will affectionately call him, this is where he resides. Now, a lot of people will ask, well, why don't they just bring up the body? Well, it's a maritime tradition that if you went down with your ship, you stayed down with your ship. And this is because a lot of the families want that to be the final resting place of their loved one. They know that they drowned with the ship. They know that the ship sank. They know that the person is probably down there resting. So they tend to leave them down there. Plus, it is maritime law, both federally, nationally, internationally, that if there are human remains found on or around a ship, then that ship is now a graveyard and is a final resting place, and you are not allowed to disturb it unless you have written permits and permissions from the governing bodies. So this is why wrecks like the Edmund Fitzgerald are pretty much off limits, because you have a lot of, I don't want to say thrill seekers, but you have a lot of people who wouldn't think twice about stealing stuff off of the Edmund Fitzgerald to resell on the internet or places like that. Only problem is, within 100 feet around the Edmund Fitzgerald, there's sensors and there's buoys. And if your boat triggers one of those, the Coast Guard comes out immediately. And you are questioned. What are you doing in this area? Why did you go through this area? And anybody who's found loitering around there or stopped around that area, you immediately get a fine. And we're talking a hefty fine. We're talking about $50,000. And if it's a repeat, it goes exponentially up from there. So there's a lot of legal parameters to protect these historic shipwrecks that we know human remains are on, and that they are no longer in service. They are just to be left alone. So anything that is a recreational dive, people dive on them all the time. There's usually shipwrecks that, you can view from the water surface, and those are, okay to dive on. But the ones that are technical dives, there's a reason why you're not supposed to dive on them, and that's because not a lot of people are trained to go that deep, and not a lot of people have permission to go that deep underneath the water. So something to think about, because here in the Great Lakes, there are probably over 20,000 shipwrecks on the bottom of the waters. And each one of those shipwrecks has a tale to tell of its history, of its crew members, of how they lived, how they died. And if you're into marine archaeology, if you're into shipwrecks, if you're into ghost ships, paranormal history of the Great Lakes, then tune in each week, because you never know what I'm going to talk about. But the paranormal history of the Great Lakes is something that I am fascinated with and love talking about. So tune in next week and see what I have to talk about, and I'll give you an update on how my Paracon went. So hope you guys have a wonderful week. Wicked Wednesday. So enjoy yourselves, and I will catch you next week. Bye, guys.